Good afternoon and welcome to the City Council Committee of a Whole meeting for Tuesday, March 16th. Seating may be limited. If you would like to send in a comment for public comment or public hearing to be read on your behalf, please submit that to our city clerk, Ms. Jaden Strand at jstrand@cityofisanti.us, or call her at 763-762-5759. I'd like to call this meeting to order. If we could all rise for Pledge Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Doing roll call, all council members are present. Any public comment at this time?
You know, I want to bring up something that's not on here, but it was brought to my attention from a contractor about building decks. And he showed me different permits from different cities. And I think, personally, we need to quit tying people's hands and making more work for them to build a deck. And one of the things that was on that checklist was they wanted a side view and basically a 3D view of what the deck is going to look like. That's kind of ridiculous. You know, you can go up to Menards and get one printed off, but it's just more time to go do it. If it's a contractor, I see no reason to give him anything like that. He should know what he's doing. It could be information for a homeowner that's building a deck that just to help them. I mean, it's still got to meet code, the inspection still got to pass it. I just don't think we need to be putting all this together for these guys when they should be knowing what they're doing anyway. And tying their hands, we went through all this stuff for basement finishes. I think the deck should be, there is safety issues in there, which the inspector's got to pass. And if they don't do it right, he's going to fail it. And that's on them. That's not really on the city, but I don't know why we need to jump through all these hoops. I mean, he handed me 3 pages from the city's deck permit from the city of Isanti, and he handed me one from all the other cities that he builds decks on. So, I mean, that's just something I think we need to put in consideration.
Streamline it more, I mean. Basically.
Yep, pretty much.
Sure.
I think because we've trying to be community friendly, that's the least we could do is maybe have Steve or Miss Selman, if you want to look over that, maybe. I mean, it's not that you have already enough to do anyway, so.
Councilmember Lundin, are you referring to the handout that we have on the webpage? Because that literally has everything you could possibly want in a
Well,
document?
it said...
Or is he talking about the actual application that he made?
Well, the application is just a standard application,
Yeah.
but it's a checklist that you got to fill out to turn in with the application.
No, we don't require that to be turned in. It's on our website so that, like you said, so the homeowner knows, oh, I need all of these things. We're not requiring that.
Then that should be told to people because they weren't aware of that.
Okay.
And I mean, I don't see a problem with it being a checklist, but when you're asking for a 3D view of the deck,
Yeah.
but
I mean-
then we should remove it. I mean, it isn't necessary.
If you
Well,
recall when I built my deck,
is.
I said, oh my gosh, I need all this? If you recall that conversation. So, I mean, I'm guilty of that too, of falling into the loop of thinking I needed it
Yeah.
as well.
Yep. Yeah, I can have Steve look at the handout, but that's probably what he's looking at is because, it's everything that you could possibly need.
I mean, I understand you want to know stringer sizes, lengths. If there's a cantilever, you can only have that. I can understand that. That's information. But I just...
Yep. I'll have him look at it and I'll bring back,
I mean,
I'll
I
have
can
the recommendation of the
understand,
building official.
I can understand if a homeowner comes in, you can give that to them. But
Yeah.
definitely a contractor, they should know better than that.
Okay.
Awesome. Anything else? Let's move on to committee meeting items then. E1, liquor store bonding options. I see Miss Jessica Green's here from Northland Securities. You may.
Just push that button so it turns
Just
green.
make sure the light turns perfect. Now you can be heard.
And Mayor, Council, well, first of all, good evening. If this gets muffled at all, just let me know if you'd prefer for me to take the mask down.
If you're comfortable, I would take it off or down.
Thank you, that would help just a bit. Okay, so Mayor, Council, what you have before you this evening is a memo that Northland has prepared related to the ongoing discussions for the new liquor store project. So what we've done is just put some information together related to financing options first and foremost, and then also method of sale for your consideration. So what I would propose to do is just walk through this memo with you. Of course, take any questions as we go, or we can sort of digest and talk about them at the end. But first, what we've got here are lease revenue bonds, and I'll just back up really quickly. So in Minnesota, as you're likely aware, the ability to borrow and to finance projects is governed by certain statutes under Minnesota state law, and you're only able to borrow for certain types of items and projects. So what we've done when we're looking at the liquor store project is looking at what certain statutes would actually allow you to finance that type of project. So again, we've got two options for you here tonight, covering the most often used financing sources for such a project. The first option here is the lease revenue bond. So we often see lease revenue bonds used for liquor store projects, community centers, and those types of projects. The lease revenue bond is a bit different than some of the other debt that's been issued by the city in that it does not carry the city's general obligation pledge, so your ability to tax. And it's really set up in a way that the EDA would actually issue the bonds and enter into a lease arrangement with the city. And the debt service that is covered by the EDA is essentially using that lease payment coming from the city to make the debt service payment. Now, in this case, when we're talking about the liquor store project, we would anticipate that liquor revenues would be used to make that lease payment over to the EDA and therefore make that debt service payment. So we don't actually anticipate dollars coming from the city to make that lease payment. It would be those liquor store funds that we would anticipate being sent over to the EDA. What we want to sort of convey here is that typically when you're looking at lease revenue bonds, they are thought to be a bit less secure from an investor standpoint. Again, you don't have that general obligation pledge of the city. So when you're looking at lease revenue bonds, investors tend to offer a lower interest rate for the more essential types of facilities. So if you're financing a city hall, a fire hall, things that provide those essential services that the city's not likely to walk away from. When it comes to community centers, liquor stores, it is a lease. So under Minnesota state law, there's sort of a covenant in there that allows you to non-appropriate on an annual basis. So if the city says, you know what, we're not going to make that payment, you have the ability to do that on an annual basis. Now, I will say, you don't want to do that, obviously. It's still a debt of the city and the EDA, and that would have some serious implications if for some reason the city were to walk away from that EDA lease payment. But that being said, just want you to be aware of the fact that when we're looking at lease revenue bonds, we have seen some difficulty in the market with lease revenue, again, because of that GO pledge and the absence of that GO pledge. When we look at the second option, so this will be on that second page, so this is general obligation tax abatement bonds. And this tool is one that the city is likely familiar with. These were the types of bonds that were used to finance the BMX facility. So the city does have outstanding tax abatement bonds. Because of that GO pledge, again, it's a bit more accepted by investors. There's a process to doing that, so you do need to hold a public hearing. And because the liquor store project or those parcels would actually be considered tax exempt, you'd have to identify other parcels whose taxes from the city perspective would make up essentially what that debt service payment is. Now again, we would anticipate liquor revenues canceling that abatement authority or that abatement levy. So we don't anticipate any sort of tax levy coming from the city, but you still have to go through the process to comply with state law. Again, you've got that note here at the bottom that I've mentioned a couple times here, that we do intend to have those liquor store revenues canceling whatever that ends up being, whether that's an abatement levy or the lease payment back to the EDA. Any questions on the two tools that are available to the city?
Jim, you're recommending to the city?
It's really up to council's sort of level of comfort. When it comes to the abatement side of things, you do have debt that is existing related to abatement. And you've got a limitation on an annual basis, which is capped at 10% of your total tax capacity or 200,000, whichever is greater. Now, in Isanti's case, you've got about $460,000 on an annual basis that you can use for abatement. Currently, the maximum that you'd be using for the outstanding bonds, the 2014 A bonds, that maxes out at around 200,000. So if you were to do abatement bonds for the liquor store project, you'd likely be getting to a point where I don't want to say that you're going to max out your abatement authority, but you might be getting close to it. Now, as the city's tax base and tax capacity grows, you would have additional room under that abatement authority. But that being said, if the city is concerned about or wants to preserve your abatement authority for economic development projects that don't fit well with TIF, then you might want to look at that lease revenue option. Now, again, the lease revenue option carries a bit of a higher interest rate because you don't have that GO pledge. So either one is a decent option. GO tax abatement bonds will be more accepted by the market.
And no disrespect to you, Councilman Burglar, you, Jessica, but I would lean on the guy that I solely know does his job fantastically in the finance department, the finance director himself, Mr. Becker. What do you think we should do?
So the easy way to understand this is just that if we want to maintain that abatement tool for future economic development, then we should not go with abatement bonds. We should just go with lease revenue. We're going to do fine in either. We'll get a lower interest rate if we do abatement bonds, but neither is going to be prohibitive. In both scenarios, I've already accounted for a debt service payment larger than what we would expect anyway, so we're fine either
You know
way.
what direction this council's headed. You know what this council wants, Mike.
If you want to,
With that being said, I am solely going to lean on you personally and say, what do you think, what would be easier for your job to be easier?
if the council wants to reserve the tool, I will defer to that, that's fine. But my thought is, if we have a project that fits the bill, let's use the tool. That's why you have the tool. So I'd kind of lean toward,
From you, we're probably better off with the lease revenue bonds, because then we leave that, the other option for something else that we need.
yeah, and it wasn't that long ago that we had this other project that maybe we don't need to talk about in detail, but we thought was going to be coming, that we thought might be an abatement type project. Now, that didn't work out, but that's not to say that a project like that might not show up tomorrow or next year or in 5 years. And so if this tool is out, if this tool is available, then that's helpful. Yeah, we aren't going to do bad with lease revenue bonds. We'll do fine with either. It's just about whether or not you want to use that tool on ourselves or keep the abatement option open for other economic development in the future.
When you say a higher interest rate on the lease revenue bonds, I mean, how much higher are we talking?
When I ran the difference last week, and caveat here that we are seeing some volatility in the market, over 15 years, around $100,000. From a basis point perspective, you're maybe looking at 20 basis points different. As Mike said, he's been accounting for that higher payment when he's doing work on the budget. So we do feel that we're in a good spot as far as what the annual debt service payment would be. And again, that would be negated by liquor store revenues, not falling on taxpayers.
So $100,000 over the course of the 15-year.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and you'd see that as 0.2% higher, is roughly.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd lean more towards the lease revenue bond.
Okay.
I think that would help the city with other, if we ever had to do a tax statement or something else. You know, I mean, that just keeps the door open for possibilities.
The
Yep.
back door.
Yep, keeps it open, for sure.
That's my opinion, but I'm 1 out of 5 of us up here.
I agree.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
I mean, I'm not a huge fan of tax abatement anyway, but, and saving the $100,000 would be nice, but I mean, I could go either way, I guess.
Sounds like the majority would go with the lease revenue bond.
Okay?
That's what I hear.
Okay, so with that in mind, the next two items that we're going to talk about are related to process for sale. And that's either going with a competitive sale, which is what the city has typically done in the past. Prior to 2010, you did some negotiated process as far as when you were selling bonds. But for the most recent future, what you've done is a public sale process. So that's really this next part on that page 2. So when we're looking at competitive sale, as you're all aware, what we do is we essentially take bids on behalf of the city. We do that in the morning. We come back to that council meeting that evening, present you with what those bids are, and then ask the council whether or not you'd like to proceed forward by awarding the bid to that low underwriter. So typically when we're working through the competitive sale process, you're setting that date pretty far in advance, and it lines up with a regularly scheduled council meeting. And competitive sales tend to work really well for the types of debt that are issued often. So when you're talking about utility debt, street debt, those types of things where it's, I don't want to call them sort of plain vanilla issues, but they are sort of the run-of-the-mill types of things that cities tend to finance. They also typically have that GO pledge behind them. Now, we have seen lease revenue bonds placed in the market. And we've got some historical information about them, but I will say that they don't happen often. We have a few comps that we've pulled from the past couple of years, some that seem to sort of apply and where we can make some sort of similarities here, and then some that we consider to be outliers because they're being issued for a very large amount of money or they're issued by a city such as Rochester, et cetera. But ultimately, when you're looking at a competitive sale, and if that's the type of sale that the city wanted to proceed with, you just want to know that when we get to the date of sale, if you don't receive bids that you like or that you're supportive of, we're in a rough spot because we can go back to the market again, but at that point, the market's kind of already told you what they think about the bond sale, and all that you have out there is your official statement. And that just provides you with generalities about the bond issue itself, but you're not actually conversing with the actual end investor. So we do competitive sales all the time. They work really well. Sometimes, though, when you feel that you have more of a story bond or something that's got a little bit more information that should be shared with people, with investors, we do see cities that enter into a more negotiated process where you're working directly with the underwriter. Now, we can't recommend any sort of method of sale to you, and we are prepared to assist the council with however you want to move forward. The negotiated sale side of things, and that's on the following page, is a bit more flexible in terms of timing. It doesn't have to be set up so that it corresponds directly with the council meeting. So you would enter into a parameters resolution to talk through what type of interest rate is acceptable to the city. And then essentially it provides the authority for the mayor and the clerk to enter into a bond purchase agreement. And then the council would essentially ratify that bond purchase agreement at the following meeting. But it gives you a good week or so flexibility. You're not tied to a certain date and time. And then again, you have the ability to really converse with investors in the long run. So if they're looking at the project and they want to know more about what it is, what the strengths are, et cetera, you have that ability to talk directly with them. So again, we're not recommending any sort of method of sale. We just want the council to be aware of some of the challenges with lease revenue bonds, being that they don't carry that GO pledge, and that in this case, because it's sort of a non-essential service, I don't want to say that liquor store is non-essential because it is to many, but in this case, it's not a city hall, it's not a fire hall, it's not one of those types of facilities. So I'm happy to answer any questions about the competitive sale process, about the negotiated process. From the negotiated process, I will say that by federal regulations, Northland is required to deal fairly with the city, and on top of that, you have a fairness opinion that's provided by an outside financial advisor. They look at the scale, they look at the terms, and tell the city whether or not they feel that that is a fair arm's length transaction. So you do have sort of that safety net as well. But again, we don't recommend a certain type of sale. Just want you to be aware of the ins and outs of each type.
There again, I'd reach back to Mr. Becker and what his recommendation
Well, I've looked at them 3 times now.
So if we were going to go with geo abatement bonds, I would say we should competitively bid it, simply because those are more certain. People like the geo backing on that. But since it's a lease revenue bond, that can be more volatile. You don't really know how the market's going to see it ahead of time. You can have some ideas about that, but you don't really know. I would do a negotiated sale. I think for me, I think the way I would explain it is that if you do a negotiated sale, you are giving up your best possible outcome, but you're also taking the worst possible outcome off the table, right? I'm taking 2 ends of the spectrum off here, and I'm narrowing the field of vision on what I can expect to be the outcome when it's actually time to sign the papers. To me, that's what makes sense. For the lease revenue bonds, I would just negotiate the sale, and we don't. Like she said, there's a third-party opinion. This is required by federal law to be a fair deal, and so I'm not too worried about that. But for me, I'd rather be getting some certainty. I'd rather be peeling off the best and worst outcomes and know that I'm landing in the middle up front ahead of time. Because of course, if we do lease revenue bonds and we say, well, we want to have a competitively bid, and again, if those bids come back, and for whatever reason the market doesn't like them, we don't have any real good choices at that point.
So I'm hearing is you'd probably prefer to see us go with negotiated.
Yep.
And I guess that's what I would go along with. I mean, Mr. Becker's put a lot of time into this thing, and he knows the numbers in and out, so that's maybe my recommendation.
If I was one bit worried, I wouldn't be looking at them 3 times. So I would agree, negotiated it is.
Yep, thumbs up.
So, I mean, if we go with general obligation tax abatement bonds, though, we're gonna get a lower interest rate, and we're gonna be able to have more of a competitive look at it besides, I mean.
Yeah, you never know what the outcome is going to be at a competitive sale, right? I mean, you don't know if you're going to get 3 bids or 7 bids, and you don't know ahead of time who's going to bid. Sometimes a competitive bid goes really well, especially if it's kind of a lean week. But if there's a lot of activity and you're at the bottom of the bucket, you might not get what you thought you were going to get. So we talk about 0.2% interest, but that's not a certainty. Again, could do better, could do worse. And that's why in this instance, if we're going to go with lease revenue bonds, I would just as soon narrow the field of outcomes, possible outcomes, and have more certainty in the planning process, and know that, yeah, I'm not going to be able to hit a home run because it's not a competitive bid, but I also know I'm not going to strike out and find myself in a position where I suddenly don't like any of the choices that I have.
Right.
So.
But I mean, if we want the lowest interest rate and the best terms, then
Yep.
competitive and general obligation tax abatement would be the way to go.
Yep. Yeah, and
At least to give us a chance at the lowest interest rate and the best.
yeah, and what if we went that way, what the council is giving up is, at least for a number of years, some flexibility on using abatement as an economic development tool for other things.
Right. I mean, you're presenting the safest option that is gonna kind of get us the middle of the road, best deal all around, and possibly, otherwise, if we want the best deal, then we'd have to kind of sacrifice some of that ability to do the economic development piece. But I guess I would like to see it that direction more. It would be the general obligation and the competitive sale, with giving us a chance to save a pretty considerable amount of money over the term of that loan. But that's what I'd like to see. But. How long are we gonna, 15 years, is that kind of what we're gonna do, or, is that the fastest that we could pay that off, you think, or can we pay it off early, can we pay it off sooner? Sooner?
Yeah, the option to pay it off early would be written into the bond document, so there'd be a particular date that, effective after that date, you would have that option.
Regardless of how we do this at all, huh?
So right now, what we've been modeling out is a 15-year term. We'd likely put an 8-year call on it. So if the liquor store is doing very well and you've amassed some cash and you want to call in the bonds, you can pay them off in full or in part. So you can pick maturities if you want to do that. And to that note, we could certainly do something that's longer or shorter too. We could do 10 years or 20 years, but I think the way that Mike's been looking at it from what the revenues are, and sort of anticipating what they are going forward and still allowing for some transfer into the general fund, that given the debt service payment on a 15-year term, that's comfortable for, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, because part of the deal is that if you go 10 years, then we start getting really tight, right? Right now, I feel like I've got a comfortable cushion in my projections that even if things don't go as well as they should, we still don't have a problem. If we shorten that up to 10 years, I haven't run those numbers anytime recently, but we might find ourselves in a position where it's like, this is a little tighter than we would be comfortable with. And then on the flip side, if you go out 20 years, you start picking up on the amortization schedule more interest. Well, if I can comfortably handle it in 15, I don't need to go 12, or I'm sorry, 20.
Okay. So we can pay it off sooner?
Yep.
But not any sooner than 8 years, though? Or,
Yeah, that's.
Yeah, which would be tough anyway, so.
Yeah, that would be tough, and and then at that point when we get to that 8-year mark, or or 10 years or whatever we're at, the question is where do we feel is cash king, right? Do we feel more comfortable at that time in that economic environment having cash on hand, or do we feel confident about the future and we're going to send that out the door? And some of that too would lead to where do we want the future tax rate to be in that future transfer in? Because remember, Ken, once this debt service ends, in theory, that's now money that comes over as a transfer into the general fund. In theory, we go from transferring $350 a year, and then at the end of that debt service schedule, we bump that up to $600,000, and get to see that immediate bump downward in the tax rate.
Right.
So we have to weigh those things out. But
Right. Okay.
yeah, and I'm okay with either bond issue, whether it's revenue or abatement. But it's just, the council just needs to understand if we issue the abatement bonds, we're probably substantively giving up on abatement as a tool for at least a number of years, probably, depending on growth and the growth in the tax capacity, it might be given up for 7 years where it's not really an effective tool, at least not for a large project. It might be something that could still be used in a smaller capacity, but, if you're going to have a large business come in that we're going to work out a deal with, that now all of a sudden that tool's off the table. And if that's the tool they really want to see, well, that's going to be tough. If they don't have a preference between TIF and abatement, and that TIF can work, we can still rock and roll.
And I'm not saying that we would need that, Councilman Gordon, but I'm not saying we wouldn't either.
It's nice to have that to fall back on, I guess,
Yeah.
if you want it, but I'm not a fan of using it anyway, so I guess I would lean more toward, let's get the best possible interest rate. We know we can save $100,000. We know we might be able to get a better rate at a competitive sale.
What if we don't? What if nobody? You could get.
But then what happens if we pay this thing off early and then that $100,000 disappears? I'd like a cushion.
What do you think the odds are of paying it off early?
If it continues to do what it's doing,
Yeah.
probably very easily.
Yeah.
But my whole thing is, I like cushion. $100,000 in 15 years isn't really a lot of money.
I know.
And when you look at it, it's a cushion. It's that cushion.
It's a safety net.
It's a safety net, again, and that's the way I like to see things. I'd rather have a safety net than walk across the bridge and have nothing underneath me. And, we're too far along now to stop, and I just think, I'd rather have that safety net than not.
Yeah.
15 years from now, I hope the heck I ain't here. I'm someplace where it's way warmer, but hopefully it, all goes well, and like I said, if the liquor store is doing as good as it is, and it does, we very well could pay it off earlier, and that $100,000 meant nothing.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna cost us something over the course of that time, but yeah, I mean, you're right, if we paid off early, we would save that, but
One of the things I think about in the back of my mind that I haven't verbalized is that Sandy now for a number of years has been growing. We've been putting up 80 to 100 homes a year, and that looks to be on a path that's going to continue for at least this year and maybe next, right? There is going to come a point in the development of the city where if you add a certain number of homes, you're just going to end up with additional commercial development just de facto. I mean, you're going to see enough households and population increase that further commercial development is going to happen, even if everybody just stands there and looks the other way. That it's going to happen, and as that happens, some of those, at least some of those opportunities are going to want or require that abatement tool. Sometimes TIF doesn't work, and sometimes that's just not how they would want it set up. Sometimes it requires both tools to even get to the dollar amount that you're looking for. So there are those kinds of things. So I think about that in the back of my mind, that as we go forward, it seems to me it's each passing year probably is more likely that we would need abatement as a tool. It's never a certainty,
yeah.
but the probability, I see it as the probability increasing that we would need that tool.
I mean, how much, I mean, I know we've got, you guys are gonna all hate me for even bringing this up, but if we don't spend that money on Eagle Park for $100,000 and we don't buy an amphitheater and a splash pad bathroom, and we know, that's gonna get us, what is it? If you combined all those things, I mean, $450,000 or so, something like that?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, if we put that money toward the liquor store instead of financing that, I mean, how much does that save us? Like, an additional amount that we could save by putting more cash toward it instead of,
Rough math. About, you would see debt service be shorter about 30,000, maybe?
I would say so. We could run that for
You
you
know.
and get that back to you tomorrow.
Rough math, but I
what
suppose,
did you say,
I
30,000?
suppose it would have to be at least 23, but I can't see it being much more than like 36. I mean, that,
Yeah. and
rough
I know-
math. And it would depend where we end up with on the final issue.
Well, I mean, you
we're
always
still still waiting for the bids and
You
stuff.
used to
but-
say, I mean, if we bond $1 million, it's gonna be $250,000 in interest, right? But
Yep.
so,
And
I mean,
his,
if that's $500,000, then
Yep.
would it
And
be
his-
125 or?
well, and I'm just talking about the debt service payment. And historically, those interest rates have been true, and now we have entered
Crazy times.
the most ridiculous interest rates, which I think they'll inch back up pretty quickly, but nonetheless. Yeah, I mean, that's an option for the council, right? I mean, let's scrap all these other projects and pour that money in and, and save ourselves that, 25 or 30 grand on debt service. And it's a matter of priorities.
I mean, I don't.
Matter
I
of
don't
matter
think
of
that's gonna
priorities
be-
for the
I
council.
don't think that's what they're gonna wanna do. But
We still gotta
I-
provide some services for
Sure.
the other people that don't care if there's a liquor store in town or not.
But that's the plan that I would like to go with all that extra money that we have there, put that toward the debt, and I would say general obligation tax abatement and competitive sale. And then that's all I've got to say about that. But that would be my ideal plan, would be that plan. But-
My ideal plan would be to pay cash for it, not have to worry about it. but
Well,
that ain't gonna
right.
happen.
Well, you know that's not gonna happen, right?
So, I mean, you gotta have realistic expectations, and I mean, that's,
It's kinda like at home, I don't want an astronomical house payment, so I can afford to do these other things I'd like to do.
yep.
So you want that cushion.
But I'm gonna tell you right now, and I brought this up at our last meeting we had, that our bids are going out, what, 16th? No. Our bids are going, it's going out to bid next week. And
Yeah.
then we're opening them like the 12th of April, which puts us about a week and a half to our next council meeting. And I said, I would like to see us have a special meeting once, so we can make that determination now, because a week could mean thousands of dollars, and it could mean 6 weeks at the end of this project. So, trying to cut money there hugely.
I think everybody's doing their due diligence, period, and trying to cross their Ts and dot their Is as far as finances go on the project. I'm still really liking the safety net. That makes me feel comfortable, so. And I'm with Councilman Lundin and Councilman Gordon, you wouldn't argue the fact that I'd love to pay cash for it and be done with it. But, I mean, let's look at reality here. It's a great idea, but for me to take other projects from the community and throw them into this, that doesn't seem right to me. So I'm still gonna stick with the lease revenue bonds, and I would personally like to do the negotiated sale. If that's what Mr. Becker's comfortable with, I wholeheartedly trust in his decision, and that's what I would lean on.
And I'm sure he put all that thought into it being the worst-case scenario anyway. And how do you know? We might come up better than we all expect. We don't know what's gonna happen. I mean, we have a set budget amount to go on this project to start with to build it. But until we get the bid from the builder, we have no idea what it's going to be.
And from what I'm seeing, though, they are sticking to that budget.
We are
Pretty
sticking to
darn
that
close.
budget. We've cut some things and we're doing some things to lighten that up and make it better and still have something decent and nice. I mean, I don't want to cut all corners, but I mean, you know, I want to cut some things that can make this a nice looking building, but we don't need the Taj Mahal, you know. We don't need all granite, we don't need all this, we don't need all that. That can all come later. So, I mean, Mr. Becker's brought it up and I agreed with him and I brought some things up and he's agreed with me on that. We're looking at some options to see how much more metal roof is versus shingles. I prefer to see the standing seam roof, but we gotta see what those numbers come in.
Now, is that, I know you guys have kind of worked on that a little bit. We haven't seen any of that kind of detail stuff. I mean, is that something that we're eventually gonna be a part of as a full council, or is that just something that it's kind of a small group?
That stuff will come when the bid package comes out. Jason and Mike Engel will go over with their recommendations, and then that'll come to the council for approval on which ones we want to go with. But I did tell them straight out, I'm not going to be the one to jump on the lowest bid. If I don't know who the guy is that's bidding low, I'm not going to jump on that because it's good. We're going to pay for it in the end. Trust me. And it's so, you know, for right now, we need to look at how we want to do this financing on it. And until we get our hard numbers, Mike's projecting things, and then Woodset is projecting things, but we don't know what things are going to be. I mean, I talked to P&M Truss a week ago last Friday, and he said trusses are 8 to 12 weeks out right now. That was 2 weeks ago. And I did bring up, I would like them, the builder, whoever's estimating this job, to reach out to local contractors to get their prices. If they lose it because they're high, that's their fault. But at least we're gonna reach out to local subcontractors and stuff, so we can get that numbers. And that's why I said it's imperative, once that bid opening is and we have the numbers, we should maybe meet and decide, and we get the ball rolling, because I have stated this, right now, they need to order material the day the contract's signed.
So once we have bids, we can go through as a full council, and we'll kind of dig more into the details of here's where we can save money here, here's where we can cut some things here, or we want to go with this type of roof, or.
There's alternate.
So right now, we're
alternate
just
pricing.
kind of working in a small group to get ideas to how we can get these bids, and then at some point here in the future, we'll go through some more detailed.
Yeah,
plans.
there's some bid alternates within the document that
Okay.
the council will have to make some decisions on, yeah.
I mean, anything that doesn't sell more liquor is money wasted, you know, I mean, and I think any extra bells and whistles that we don't need to have, we shouldn't have. If it doesn't move bottles off the shelf, then we don't need it.
Now back to what's at hand here. I guess the consensus I'm getting is the lease revenue bonds is what we wanted to go with there, and
With general.
a negotiated sale would have
Negotiate sale.
been the other option. So that's what I'm getting, a majority. If I am wrong, Speak now.
Well, I just want to clarify with Mr. Becker that we're by going with the negotiated sale, we're cutting out the high risk and low risk ends, right? Is that what we're doing?
Yeah.
So I like the safety net idea too, so I would agree with that, the negotiated sale.
Yep.
So,
Any other questions for Ms. Green? Thank you for your
thank you for
time.
coming. Yeah,
Mayor,
so-
council, thank you for that direction. We'll keep moving forward.
Move on to E2, Public Works Update. Mr. Sylvester.
Thank you, Mayor Johnson, and members of City Council. For Public Works updates, we have, for streets, we moved a lot of snow out of cul-de-sacs and intersections this winter to make room for the more snow that was coming. We posted doors in January for tree trimming. Tree trimming is something we do every year during the winter months, kind of a filler if we don't get snow. It's just something we do every year. Is this not on?
We can't hear you very well.
Oh, I'm sorry. With the warm weather, staff has been out doing yard repairs from plow damage. Staff has been filling potholes and continuing to monitor those as they come up. Public Works took time this winter to do some painting at the shop for the break room and the bathroom walls down there. For storms, staff has been out sweeping streets during that warm swell that we just kind of went through there, so we'll keep doing that as the weather allows us. Staff has been hauling brush out. Brush is taken to Central Landscaping in East Bethel. Annual maintenance for the air release valves has begun this year, as well as annual maintenance was completed at the wastewater plant for the filters that are there. They were shocked and put back online, and the pond aeration pumps had new belts, air filters, and oil changed on those. For the water, annual maintenance was done on the Myox machine. We acid wash that every year, twice a year. Staff has been creating a callback log. So a callback log is something we kind of went through all the alarms that the SCADA will call out for, and then we wrote down in that log what to do if that alarm calls out. Because some of the new guys haven't seen all the alarms that will call out, so it kind of gives them an idea when they're on call. If I get this common alarm at the wastewater plant, they kind of have an idea what that common alarm is and what the solution is for that common alarm before they go ahead and call other staff. Just kind of a training tool we created for them. The annual water hardness test was taken, and that's posted on the city's website, the results. For parks, Alyssa Olson was hired on as our new Parks and Rec coordinator. We're happy to have her on board. Staff made some shelving at the community center to just help store the mini supplies like the Christmas decorations and Curious Creatures supplies, so they're kind of all condensed to a certain area. Some of the reports that were completed was the MPARS report and the ESPARS report, and the solid waste report was done. And the water hardness sample, if you're curious, was 17.11 grains per gallon, if you're curious what that result was. That's what I got.
Is that good or bad?
It's not hardly a change from last year. Last year, I think it was like, well, as far as milligrams per liter, it was 285 milligrams per liter this year. Last year was like 284. So it's like, it rarely changes, just slightly, but yeah.
17 grains hard isn't that bad.
That's good. All right.
We're still running good.
I do have a question. So we're getting, I know we're not done, but we're getting to the end of snow removal and that type of stuff. How did it go this year? Any problems? Anything we need to know about that way?
No, nothing other than the normal. And to be honest with you, I didn't have a lot of calls that came through and complaints this year for yard damage. I know they were out there, and we were out there taking care and picking up sod chunks early. As the snow was melting away. But no real repairs had taken place. Nothing really stands out. No major breakdowns happened or anything like that. So, just a normal year.
As far as mailboxes or damaged yards, him and I will start getting them, if there is any.
Yeah.
But none as of yet for me.
I had very little. I actually all winter long I make a list as they come in, so we're going to plow. I might get a call. I just hold on to those addresses, hold on to that number, and when the guys go out in the spring of the year, says, okay, start with these 5. But I think I maybe had 3. No, I didn't have any.
I didn't
Came
have
in all
any.
year.
I remember, I don't know.
big
if-
change.
Yeah, I don't know if 2 years ago was just an abnormal February or not, but I remember, what was that? Almost every council meeting, we were talking snow removal 2 years ago.
Well, if we get snow now, and when the ground has melted, this is where the yard damage usually will happen, because
Somebody
if the
was
plow
stirring the
does
pot,
fall
I
off the
don't know if
wing,
you recall.
or the wing goes off the side or the curb, there's no give there. So hopefully we don't get any more snow.
Well, I know it's not over with yet. The last 3 years we've had April snowfalls, but as you say, the ground's melting now,
Yeah, some of the frost has gone off.
Are we gonna make snow for the hill anymore, or are we done with that?
We're seeding it, right? We gotta
it's-
get grass on that.
It's been seeded, we need some more
need it
weather
to
for it to
grow.
grow.
We need some rain now.
Right? Thanks, Matt. Good job as
Thank
always,
you.
sir. Keep them fellas going. Let's move on to E3, water shutoff, policy discussion.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So historically, when we do utility billing, we do not do water shutoffs between the cold weather rule months, which is October 15th to, I believe, April 15th. Now, cold water rule in Minnesota is for utilities that provide heat. So CenterPoint Energy has to abide by that. And then there's state statute that gives the rules of how you can apply. Sometimes it's by a form to those utilities, so you don't get your utility shut off because of public safety, life and safety. So historically here, we have not done water shutoffs during the cold weather months. I'm gonna call it a courtesy because we can't find that it's actually written in policy anywhere. There's some reference about cold water rule dates in our ordinance, in our utilities section, chapter 262. However, it doesn't specifically stay in there that we don't shut your water off. I just wanna make council aware of that, and it's been a policy that has gone on at least 8 years, probably a lot longer than that. That we haven't shut the water off, and then once it's past April, if you don't come up current with your bill, then you could get your water shut off, and then it does ultimately get assessed to taxes. So we do get paid, regardless. But I just want to make sure council was still is aware of it, and then of the mind that they want to continue that process. If you do, will then put together a policy by a resolution that's the action that we do, and then it can be formally approved by council.
I think we should stick with it. I mean, we really should. This last year has been a crazy nightmare for everybody. There's people have lost their jobs. There's people that have fallen on hard times because of what's gone on. And I mean, I think that it does happen, and I think we're gonna have it happen here sooner than a lot wanna think. Again, I think our economy is gonna take another turn for the worse again. But I think just stay with the cold weather.
I think that, Mayor House, I think that we could argue that for public health reasons, it's good for people to be able to have their water. So, I mean,
I think it
probably
should be in
all times of
policy,
the
though.
year, but I do think it should be in writing, so everyone's aware that that is what we do, everyone being staff and council.
Yeah.
So, okay, that's the direction I need, thank you.
Any other discussion on that item, council? All right, we'll move on to E4 then, the address changes by 911 coordinator / dispatcher.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The 911 coordinator dispatcher, Robert Shulgren, has contacted me and wanted us to review the discrepancies that we have in our city for addresses. We do have some addresses that are on the north side of the road that are wrong, the south side of the road, east, west. So he was asking us to look at them, like the odd numbers should be assigned on the north side if the street's running east and west, and then vice versa for the even numbers. In your packet, there's a list of discrepancies that he has pointed out. So I wanted to talk to the council and see if you want to do anything about this. This does affect a lot of households and businesses. We do now have an ordinance that specifically states this is how we address it, and when this was adopted, we've been doing that policy since this was adopted. And I continue to do that policy. It is my responsibility to do the addressing, so I do follow the city code when presented the opportunity. I know that the police chief does have some comments on this as well.
That's,
I guess my question right away to the chief would be, public safety or officer safety? Do you see an issue with this, chief?
No, I mean, I've worked in many jurisdictions, and I've actually talked to our patrol officers that have too. Every jurisdiction we've worked in have had oddities within their numerical system. Changing any of these isn't gonna change our responses. I mean, for example, on Heritage, there's odd and even, that's, if you just go on that one list, there's only houses on the north side of Heritage, right? So if it's odd or even, it's not really gonna make a difference. So as far as a public safety response, it's not gonna make a bit of difference. The only time I've seen addresses that had, say, not necessarily fire department or police department, because we know the oddities in the city. It's when the outside, like when Alina is backed up and they'll call a different EMS service. For example, some of you may know, 200 Railroad Avenue. That's within the geographic grid system. It doesn't have a driveway to Railroad Avenue, right? So that's more of a public safety thing that has nothing to do with this numerical ideology for the GIS system. So as far as public safety, there's, just from the public safety standpoint, there is no necessity to change any of these recommendations from our response. I mean, like, we went through these at the office. I mean, for example, even on Heritage, the 702 listed on there is a field. 790 is the Al-Anon building, and 791 is a cemetery. So if it's supposed to be 790 versus 791, if there's a call at the cemetery, that's what I'm getting at. There's really no public safety delay or response or what that is. And I asked some of my officers, what their thoughts are with some of this. And for example, even though there's an oddity in the, if you think about geogridding, meaning you start at this in 100, 200, 300, whatever, they should all line up as far as the houses. You have, buckskin on the west side of the Highway 65. They're single digits. Doesn't make sense when it comes in how it lines up in the block number. However, as I'm sure Councilman Gordon can say, dispatch doesn't always give us southeast, northeast, or northwest accurately, but when we get 15 buckskin, they know they go to the west side. So there's actually a good response for having it to be an oddity. So as far as public safety response, I don't think there's any concerns with the issues laid out here as far as our response for public safety.
So is this more for the county then, or what?
It's more of a, I live just out in the county. My address doesn't, mine would be on a list for the county, and it doesn't get changed. So if you go north on the road I live on, my neighbor's address is higher than mine, and I live north of him, right? So it doesn't make sense when you lay it out in a GIS, like Geographical Information Coordinate System, they're just not lining up to be 100% uniform throughout the whole county, throughout everything. That's the bigger piece. It just doesn't uniformly make sense. Like Selman said, going forward, these recommendations are in our code, so anything that changes, new addresses are going to be within that.
Let me ask you this, if the county had to back up the city's police, or we could even say if another, let's say North Branch Fire had to assist Isani Fire, GPS is going to bring you right to the address, is it not?
9 times out of 10, however, if there's an assistance call when Isani Fire is on a house fire at an address that's, say, 200 Railroad Avenue, which is going to show probably a dot on Railroad Avenue where there's no driveway, our first responders are going to be there first. And bright lights, you'll be able to see where they are.
My problem is with this, Ms. Selman, were you here when we changed to Heritage Boulevard? Mr. Collins was, so was Mr. Burgley.
Owners,
And there was multiple businesses that cost them a lot of money. The gun shop, SHRO, or SHR cost him a ton of money because that's a federal license. He was livid. I concur. If you're gonna see an emergency vehicle, we're generally gonna be there first, and if you can't see the lights, maybe you shouldn't be in that vehicle. We had that discussion with one of the fire trucks. This was, I think, before Jimmy was on the fire department. This guy says, "Those lights are horrid. They blind me." Well, that's why they're bright, so you see them. I mean, I guess if we were to have to change this, I'd say we'd have to do this in baby steps. And I would work with any businesses that are involved in here. I mean, you take, just for example, Colburn's. You gotta change their address. That's gonna be a nightmare for them.
Because it's too low?
I mean, that's the whole thing. And to change some of this stuff, I mean, you got stationery that they have stamps, they have all this stuff that they have to change. And then they have to change it with the state because it's a registered business. It's a nightmare.
Even some residentials have brick and mortar addresses in.
Yep.
their
Yeah.
Brick,
Yep. So
so.
if we were to do this, I'd say we'd have to take this in huge baby steps.
I don't think we should do it.
So Mayor and Council, if I may, the direction that staff had received numerous years ago, because these anomalies, I think, have bothered the county for quite some time. But when I was in some of our previous committee meetings, and these have been, not these, but other ones have been brought up, and there were some that were changed, and there is a large outcry, whether it's a business or a resident. O'Reilly is a great example. They were one that the street changed. I believe that was from the county's direction or request at that time, but I can't be 100% on that. There still are issues between the post office, their documentation on the street being correct, and they weren't even built yet when that address and that street changed from Broadway to 6th. So there are a lot of growing pains, and at the time, the recommendation to the county was to give us your full list, because we did what you asked. We had the outcry, and it wasn't very long after that, they're like, oh, and change these too, and we're like, wait a minute. This gets people upset, not at the county, people upset at the city.
Yep.
Because we're the ones who gave the addresses in the first place. And it's a very painful subject, that's why we said, give us your full list. And I think that this is it took 4 years to get this list from them. So it's contradictory to what you're saying, Councilmember Lundin, to do it in baby steps, because we did ask them, give me the whole list, see what this is. It's taken a
No,
long
that's what I'm
time.
saying is if we were to change this, just these right now, it would have to be done in baby steps. When I lived over by the school over on the other side of 65, my address changed 3 times in 2 years. Because that was Sun Prairie, I think it was called Sun Prairie Edition originally. And my address over there, that address changed 3 times. And I had to order things, and it came over here off of Whiskey Road in Brookview. I mean, it's like, come on. But then I had to change checks. I had to go to all my mail, everything that comes in correspondence and mail and payments. Driver's license, everything had to be changed. And I have my permit to carry, and then that's a nightmare to do that, and that cost me another $30. So, I mean,
I do think on any of these requests, and I can point out one for sure on here that we could direct Mr. Sylvester to look into, is to make sure our street signs are correct. It looks like one of them may be not correct. The first option, number 2. So make sure that the Polk Street goes shows both directions, or whatever we need to do. We want to make sure that our signage is correct. So I think that's really important we will make sure we take care of that. For
yeah,
sure.
that I
agree with that, but
I think
I
that
don't.
sign just says Railroad Avenue this way, Polk Street that way.
Yeah.
I think that's.
Yep,
the
that's
sign
what it
that's
does. When you
referring
come off of South Passage, it says Railroad Avenue North.
On Towns
and
Edge
Polk-
Road there,
Yeah,
But that is correct, actually.
isn't it?
South Passage.
Is it South Passage?
Yeah, that sign's just like that at South
That
Passage.
is correct, though. It does change right at that intersection.
Jason?
Yeah, so
But-
we brought in that segment of Polk, and it got brought into the city, it became Railroad Avenue. So the homes on the east side of the road aren't in city limits, but the road has been changed to called Railroad Avenue because it's a city street. And then south, it's Polk because it's not a city street.
But there's arrows for that, right?
And there's arrows at the intersection, but the 2 homes on the east side of Railroad, I believe their addresses are probably still Polk, because they're outside of city limits, they weren't really directed under the city's, control on their address, but the street changed. So those 2 homes, I'm completely aware of, I guess, how that all went down. I just, those 2 addresses outside of the city limit would be maybe, a good idea to get changed.
So
to
Polk doesn't
Railroad
go
Avenue.
both directions, it just goes
It
south.
just goes south now.
And
Yeah,
then railroad goes north,
correct.
and those arrows. So what's wrong with the
Basically,
signs?
But those 2 houses are still probably Polk addresses, even though they're really on.
Yeah, because they're not in the city.
Right, and that's why I can see how that can be confusing, because if it says it's on Polk and this.
But I bet you would ask any police officer, any firefighter, they'd know exactly where it was. I don't see any,
2 houses on that entire stretch.
I
Yeah.
mean, if there's no public safety issue in this, I don't know why we would do it.
Yeah.
I would just make sure our signs are correct and be done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those 2 houses we're referring to, maybe if next time they change ownership, maybe that would be the time to do it. I don't know. If we were to do those 2.
That's a big if, but yeah. Or if they ever got Well, they would never, unless they agreed to be annexed, but.
I have to concur. I don't think we need to change anything. I think,
Let's not go there,
Let's
though.
not do that nightmare again.
no. No, I concur. I think we should just leave it as is right now.
Yeah.
And if there's any conflicting street signs, as Ms. Woods brought up, let's address those and let's be done with that. I don't want to see this change, because I mean,
No way.
it cost me probably $300-400 to have my address changed that 3 times.
Yeah, I'm
And I
not-
never even left the house.
I'm not up here to be getting people to pay more money. That's not cool. Let's move on to E5 then. City Council Agenda Request by Josh S. Home Pride Incorporated. Hello, Mr. Josh. Very well, sir. What do you got for us?
Well, we had a discussion today, kind of getting closer to final plat approval and planning construction, and just wanted to discuss, I probably could have discussed a little more in depth with Sheila and Jason, as far as how you guys, I've got a few different builders interested in some lots, and as we get constructing, wanted to see what the cities, if they're open to, or if you guys would be open to allowing a few homes or some homes to be constructed during the development process, so that we could hopefully kind of have some kind of models up sooner, you know, kind of up and running, so when the project is finished.
Well, people want to know what they're buying.
Yeah, well, and
Well,
it's kind of like the fall parade, like potentially, if we're able to get going here in the next, 30 to 45 days, if we could get something going for, so you have like some models, maybe you can get one in the parade of homes or different things, and kind of that traffic, and, so yeah, just kind of want to discuss that, and I don't know what the city's normal stance is on that, I guess, but Sheila said, why don't you bring it up to discussion, so I'm here today.
I guess I'd ask Ms. Selman, models aren't occupied. The only thing that I would say that would have a problem would be, is traffic going in and out if the street's not prepared. But, that being said, I've driven through Legacy, whatever that's called over Legacy Pines, I've driven through that thing and the roads weren't even done anyway. But, just seeing what progress is on it. So, your thoughts, Ms. Selman?
So typically, we don't allow development on a proposed subdivision until it's been recorded with the county, we have a development agreement in place, and we have a letter of credit in place. So from my understanding is, Josh is asking to do that, to build a house or two or a few before that happens. I would not suggest doing that, because you wouldn't have utilities in place, so how are they gonna hook up to city sewer and water if the development ends up failing, let's just say? So they build, 2-3 houses without the plat being recorded, so then the lots actually aren't of record, streets aren't in, utilities aren't in, so then what happens? I mean, that kind of puts us at a liability.
That I don't really want, I would want to get this finalized and recorded for sure, and even start construction, start grading, start doing some things, but maybe at least get the road set so that you've graded your road out, you have your pad established for the house, then basically start construction on digging a basement, and then you might not have your, depending on the order of operators, if you did your city sewer and water, you might do that at the end, you might do that first, but you could always connect it in after, after it's all constructed, basically. So if the house was there and the city sewer and water wasn't in when you dug the basement, by the time you'd be done, then you could hook up, basically. It's kind of what I was thinking.
Here's what I would say, and I imagine these gentlemen are gonna.
Let's
follow
lean
it.
on the plumber.
I would say, as long as you have your line of credit in, it's all platted, you get the roads started, at least started, graded, you get your line of credit into the city. All those procedures that are done, that we need to have to secure this thing, I have no problem with that, because it does take time to build it.
I'd prefer to at least the first lift done?
Actually, he'd be better off if he didn't have his first lift down.
If the
Because,
city ever ends up having to do that,
but if he's got his line of credit in there,
Right, he's got his line of credit.
that's gonna take care of that. If he has his first lift down,
That's our
all the,
cushion,
do-
his
all
line
the,
of
do-
credit.
all the cement trucks running on that thing, that first lift, that's an inch thick, is gonna be nothing but gravel anyway.
that's what they typically do.
Now,
The first
it's-
lift after all the major construction's done, then they do the
I'll
second.
take you down to 3 developments in Lakeville right now that aren't that way.
I don't live down there.
But I'm just telling you, and their stringencies are a little more than ours are, trust me. I have no problem with that at that point. But I mean, we need the planning done. We need the approval of it, all done, your line of credit. What else was there, Ms. Hillman?
Well, just the utilities, grading, I mean, maybe we can have our city
Recorded with
engineer
the
kind of
county.
comment on that, but the development agreement executed, recorded.
Yep, that agreement needs to be executed. Those being and done, I don't see any problem with that, because it's not really, you already got your line of credit in, and if you fail on this, it's gonna be covered. So, and you're trying to get models up, well, I hate to tell you, if you wanna sell a model, you're gonna want the street to look decent anyway. But I know it's taking time. It's right now, in an average house, it's probably taking an extra 60 days minimum time frame. I just know for a fact, we had 20 ground runs in houses that were pushed away this week that we were scheduled to do. Because, and now, we're double booked for our company for next month already.
Yeah.
His request, his reason for request is allow builders to have a model for fall parade of homes. I mean,
Yep.
I get that, he wants to put it in there.
And I would assume by fall, you're going to have the street in. But like I said, to get that house built, it's gonna take time, you know?
Yeah.
But I mean,
we
I-
would
I-
certainly wanna get our grading to match the grading plan and roads, grading, all that, so we're not putting something that doesn't meet what our agreement is as far as the overall grading and things of that nature. So, I mean, if we gotta start on that and we could make sure before we started on something that we, you know, it meets what our actual plan that we turned in to, or for construction of the development. you know.
And also, I'm assuming you're gonna be doing your curb and gutter, and you're gonna be doing all this stuff, even though they're starting to build this house.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, most houses, when they get built, they don't get a driveway in until the very last thing. That driveway asphalt doesn't even get touched till it's the last thing. You know, and then the landscapers are screaming because they got a short window of frame to get their sod in before the house closes. So I do know that, and there's a reason for that. So personally, I don't have any problem with it, but I think we need all those other factors need to be done prior to even issuing a permit to a house being built.
What about how many would you guys be, I mean,
I don't want to see 50 homes going there before any of that, we get this done.
Well, how many different models are you gonna have? I mean, I assume it has some good models.
well, there's a few different style, lot, size, shapes, so you're probably gonna do something a little different for each one.
So how many do you want?
I think at the most 5, maybe 2 or 3 is probably what it'll end up being, you know.
Again, I think if you
it
crossed your
depends
Ts and
on
dotted
if-
your Is with Smith Selman, I wouldn't see a problem with
Well, and it
5
could be
different
more
models.
than, it could be more than that. It could be just a couple right away, and then we're getting almost to the very end of the project, and some things are starting to move, and, we wanna get going on more of it,
I
maybe
would,
that-
I would, I would go out to myself and say, I'd say 5 right now. And then if you want more, you need to come see us again, and we need to see the progress of what's going on out there. Because if it's all of a sudden you're dragging your heels on getting this other stuff done, I want to get you done. As a developer, you want it done because you're going to get your money sooner.
Yeah.
I mean, and then Jason's got something to add?
Yeah, I guess just for comparisons, some cities they'll do the first available lot can be a spec home, just because then there's not like access problems. you know, on the idea of having a spec home of each type of lot, you know, the way the layout is, they might be thinking they're gonna have a home being built in the back side of the development where access, you know, the trenches of the main contractor trying to do their work can kind of be a hazardous type of a construction site that we don't want to allow public going to an open house in the back side of an open construction site.
Or a fire truck getting back there might be
Correct,
an issue.
you know, for the work under construction. So usually, you know, I would recommend that it only be that first home or maybe the first 3 homes, but, you know, they would most likely, in this case, be the same type of parcel. So I don't know if that'd be as beneficial, but constricting how far in these are going would be kind of a key, I think, just for controlling that, even that open house day. You know, if it actually is occurring before the road's paved, and Councilman Carlson's correct, we do actually usually specify that the curb and the non-wear has to be down before we start letting permits get pulled. And it's mostly that exact thing, so that that underground active construction site safety element is addressed, and then they can pick whatever lot they want, you know, and get wherever they want. But that'd be the only extra restriction, I guess, that I'd recommend that you at least consider on where these would be allowed in advance, because that topic of not having a service available to it, you'd want to stick with the spec home, but definitely not a home that's trying to get occupancy, in that if for some reason or another the utility isn't there, you know, they're not gonna be able to get occupancy. So
Fire hydrants, not there?
yep, no fire protection, you know, everything that goes further into these things, it's higher risk.
Usually, generally though, sewer and water is in before
That's the
street
first
goes
thing that
down.
goes in, right.
Yeah,
No,
sewer and
it has
water
to
is
be.
going in before even curb and gutter's down.
has to
So it's gonna be there. I mean, I see that.
Well,
And I do agree with Jason on that same thing. The further you get into this thing, the more nightmares you're gonna have. Because your contractors are gonna try to do something, and you got every Tom, Dick, and Harry driving up and down in the street, and they're trying to get their work done. I guess I'd have to concur if we can bring it into the first part, and you could even get a first lift of asphalt in that first section.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the first couple would be, I don't think we're gonna try to do 5 all over the place. I think maybe that first lot is a good spot. I think we already got a fire hydrant real close to that first lot anyways. We could get a couple right in that first access point as we start in. And then as we get farther along, being able to really open it up, to Dan's point, you know, it's to you get it to a certain point, well, okay, let's open it up where you can really start pulling more permits and really going for it, you know. So, but that's part of what I wanted to discuss, so I could kind of communicate that, you know, better with, you know, as I try to market these a little bit, so.
So, Council, are we saying that as long as the letter of credit is in, it's platted, grading is done, sewer and water is in, then we're good? Okay.
Are those all, is that good with you? I mean, is that what you're hoping for? I mean,
Is that gonna help you out?
I think the sewer and water might, I think if we could,
That's the
maybe-
first thing to go down, Josh.
Yeah, I think
That shows a big commitment on your part, when you
Yeah.
get sewer and water installed.
I think if we were to just, at the minimum, maybe be able to start, like Jace was saying, to that first one kind of going in, and then maybe we open it up as we get, certainly we would try to get all that in right away, and we certainly wouldn't be starting. I think, I'm sure that would be fine. I just gotta kind of look at our schedule and different things. If there's a way to maybe get something going on those first couple lots, if we get them graded and we're depending how the project's going, that might be helpful. But I guess if you know, I'm open and I can plan accordingly. So, you know, just so I know, okay, well, this is what I got to do to get it rolling. You know, so.
You okay with that, Jason?
Well, there's a couple different questions, because first we said with sewer and water, and now he's saying the first couple lots without sewer and water. Is that what we're going to allow? Right, Josh, that's what you're saying? Do the first couple lots before you start, you have
Yeah, I guess ideally what I was saying was, if we could, like Jason said, do a first couple, possibly get a couple going sooner than later, even early on. I think we've got sewer and water right there for some of the issues that could be, you know, safety issues, different things. But then as we get farther into the development, maybe we could open it up to more, you know, permits being allowed as we hit those thresholds, I guess, of what you guys, if we can nail that.
I would have to agree with Councilman Collison though, that shows a big commitment by you, Josh, if you're putting sewer and water in there.
He's gotta have sewer and water in there. He's not gonna do anything with the street until then. I mean,
Yeah, but he's saying the first couple without. He wants to put the first couple in without sewer and water.
well, you
Not
see-
necessarily. The pretty, one challenge is we got a little shallow depths out there, so we're gonna have, some pretty serious grading to kind of mix in. We might have some dewatering. So we are probably gonna do the city or sewer and water right away, but there is some pieces of that'll get,
I think Legacy Pines, they're doing dewatering out there too.
Yeah,
yeah.
I believe they were. Right?
Yeah, but Legacy Pines held to the no building permits until the first lift of pavement was down, so they didn't get to do a single home. You know, I would still hold to the very first parcel, you know, a spec home, being able to get started, maybe without utilities, but anything after that, those deeper trenches should be passed, you know? But it's up to you guys.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't let anybody else do it.
Jason, have we, I
Nobody
know
else
we did not
That's
allow
true.
Legacy Pines, but have we ever done that in any of our
Did
developments?
Legacy Pines ever ask to do something like that?
I believe they asked originally, and the answer was just, the policy is it's gotta have its non-wear lift down,
Yeah,
I
but
and that was it.
I wasn't here, so I didn't.
he pushed harder than they did. He's here, they're not.
I think the thing they got going for them
Well, they
is
did
they're
too,
already got a little more established development. They already got inventory of lots that are continually going.
Well, here's
Where
another thing though.
I'm kinda getting a fresh start here.
Legacy
So-
Pines kept coming in and asking to change his line of credit. He
That he
hasn't
did.
asked to do this.
That he hasn't.
I'm good, whatever he wants to do, I'm good with, so. If,
I'd be fine with the first lift and all utilities up to the first lot.
Yeah, is that doable?
I think so. I mean,
But I don't wanna see 5 houses without, you know,
Any utilities?
no, I.
No, I don't, I
No,
mean,
I want utilities and first lift up to the
Right,
first lot.
but you don't want to see 5 that way.
No. No,
So how many do you want to see, 2 or 1?
1 or 2, the first 2 lots, but both of them have to have utilities. There's gotta be a fire hydrant there, and the first lift of pavement.
yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, you're gonna get somebody that starts doing the utility work, they're gonna be pushing that utilities. They ain't stopping.
No, and
Yeah,
then you're
yeah,
gonna-
I mean, just for the way construction goes, that paving contractor isn't gonna show up until the entire project's ready to get paved. So they're not gonna be able to just get like 1 parcel worth of the full process done to that home. So, you know, it'd be basically continuing with the current standard if we're gonna have them get the pavement down, because it's literally gonna be, the utility crew is running ahead of the grading crew, is running ahead of the paving crew. By the time they get to that, the whole development's gonna be, you know, 3/4 done, and, I mean, it's currently what we're doing.
Yeah.
It's just whether or not you wanna allow those, a
Well, it'd
change,
be
I
up
guess.
to him, I guess,
Yep.
to pay that
Yep. But-
fee for them to come out and do a little bit.
Correct, yep, and it basically would be exactly what our current policy has been, you know, if they chose to do
You
just the
just won't have
first
to do
100
the
feet.
whole development at that.
Yep,
Yeah,
Yep.
I don't know if I would probably do that, but yeah, I would just kind of push things back a little bit. So just trying to come up with a game plan and plan accordingly and, you know, see if it makes sense to, you know, what all makes sense. So, trying to think if I had a questions, but, yeah, I don't know. I think if that were the case, I probably, yeah, like Jason was saying, I don't think it would make sense to pay, nor would I think I'd be able to get anybody out here to do it. To be honest, I think it'd be just difficult to, it's maybe possible, but I'm guessing you'd have to darn near tear that out, whatever you did, and redo it, or I don't know, maybe.
Probably.
You know,
Not if
I
it's
mean,
just the first lift.
It'll
as
be,
far
so
as the
it'll
pavements
be
go.
destroyed.
But
You start driving trucks in there with the low boys and,
most of your developments around here, the first lift isn't done, or the second lift isn't done until most of the houses are built.
what you want him to do, that first section would just be hammered. There'll be nothing left of it. It'll be junk. It'll look like the old Spectacular Events parking lot.
It'll look like Main Street.
Yeah, and it'd be likely it would, probably would have to come back out unless they did the curb first, which is, you know, again, the procedure would be utilities go in, grade it in, gravel the road, then the concrete curb goes in and then you pave. So if they just put some pavement down without the curb on, it'd be very unlikely that it would be where it needs to be in the end. And so it would generally be kind of like,
So, Josh,
maybe I'd
where-
picture it as a paved driveway to this place, and then that would.
Where are
most
you
likely
at
come
with
back out.
with the line of credit, the final plot approval? Where are you at with all that?
line of credit's been approved for a few months.
Okay?
All financing's all that's kind of done. Kind of scaled back a few lots just because I was gonna do a little bit more, but just, there's someone, you know, we're still working through our final design and just with some water depths and balancing and just wanna make sure, don't get too, you know, we kind of scaled it back, so we can definitely go in and get more lots done quickly, but kind of get a nice start on it and not, you know, get it to where it's just too big, too fast, and too much going on at once, you know, so that's kind of part of what we discussed today. But we're working on getting some Mylars reviewed, you know, so hopefully that next meeting we'd be really going to final plat, get the Mylars, and Sheila should be able to get the developers agreement going quickly
Yeah.
now. We just need to get.
So I mean,
So-
you're just close. You're
Yeah.
at the top. You're not quite at the top step yet.
Yeah, we haven't done the final plat. That will come in the April meeting for the final plat approval, and then the development agreement will come to the second, hopefully, to the second meeting in April. That's the goal. Depends on how everything falls into
And I'll be
place.
honest with you, you aren't gonna get a lot done between now and then anyway. You couldn't do anything anyway. I mean, we still got frost on the ground.
Yeah, but I think what Josh is asking is after the lots, you know, the Mylars have been recorded, the DA is recorded, if you can start construction right away.
You're gonna,
Not
you'd be,
necessarily right away. I would wanna be able to, for sure, come in, start grading, start moving dirt, you know, probably 30 days into construction of the project. At that point, when we get some of the major grading work done, kinda get, I mean, at that point, we might have all the utilities in or whatever, but, you know, kinda get it to a safe point where it's like, okay, could we throw in a couple of houses at that point? I'm not thinking day one. I don't wanna put that pressure on my contractor doing the work on the development, and I may not even do any of this. I'm looking at options.
I think what
See
I
how it
would
plays
suggest
out.
at this point, Josh, I would probably suggest, let's get the final plot approved. Let's get it recorded with the county. Let's get the line of credit in. Let's get all that done and get some dirt moving. See where you're at. See where your contractor's at, gonna be in your sewer and waters.
Yeah,
I
part
think-
of that was, I was even thinking today, I'm like, well, it's a little bit
And then come back.
preliminary, you know, but this meeting was scheduled a few weeks ago. We've changed some things around. But I figured, well, I'm here, we're on the agenda, might as well
Let's
talk to you guys.
revisit this once you get
Yeah, we
going
could
on here.
revisit it at final plat a little bit, or, you know, I'll have some better timelines.
Cause like I said, you're gonna get a utility contractor, who's not gonna come in there and he's not gonna wanna do just part of it. Once he starts digging, he ain't gonna stop. He wants to get all the way to the end. If you're doing it in 3 phases, that's a different story, but if you're not, he's gonna just keep digging until he gets to the end. He wants to get done and out of there, cause he's got another project to go to. So, I mean,
Yeah, and I could probably take my contractor and say, hey, this is kind of what I'd like to do. We could lay out a timeline and kind of, and by then, you know, by the time we do our developers agreement or something like that, we could say, hey, this is my timeline. This is when, this is about the point where he would be comfortable, you know, or they would be comfortable, I should say.
Yep.
With us doing something, and then we could have another discussion about it, I guess.
I think what I would say to you is when you get your agreement done, all that done,
Move some dirt.
move some dirt. I mean, you're gonna know
Come
once you get all that done, you can start getting everybody to come in and start doing their stuff. And then let's come in with a schedule and see what we're looking at.
Yeah.
And then maybe we can revisit it at that point and see where you're at. Because you know, I don't wanna give in to you when we've had other people do things, but yet again, I want you to be prosperous. But we also gotta try to stay on our same page as what we've always been.
Makes sense. Yeah, let's work through what we got right now, and then we'll, you know, I'm gonna be back in here a couple times, final this up, and by then I should have some good timelines, and we can revisit exactly what my plan is, but I figured I'd at least meet with you today and kind of have a discussion. I think that sounds fair.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Josh, for coming in.
Thanks.
There is one thing that I want to what?
There are 2 more additional items. You have one and I have one as well.
Okay.
And perhaps if we have time after that, another one, so.
The item that I wanted to add, which I'm pretty confident he's here for, is I've gotten many residents that have contacted me wondering why we don't have an ordinance on having bee farms. And he sent me a lot of stuff, which I can send to you guys as well. But some of it, I will admit, I didn't get to go through all of it. I went through about half of it. If you want to step up here and give the council a little more insight of your thought, and you can take your mask off if you're comfortable with it.
Well, I know that I've had interest in it, and I do some stuff at my father's farm out in Wisconsin, and I have other friends that have interest in keeping bees as well. And as far as some of the concern that I hear about people when they hear bees immediately, you know, they're dangerous and they sting people and people die from bee attacks. But keeping honeybees is, I mean, they're relatively docile. It's becoming more and more popular and almost a necessity in urban areas versus the rural areas. I know there's a story that I had read about a gentleman in, I believe, Cincinnati. He keeps an apiary on top of his building, and he does it kind of as a hobbyist. He has a couple dozen hives up there, and if you didn't know the guy or know that it was there, you would never know. And I mean, as far as the danger from them, there really isn't a huge danger unless you're intentionally in there to make them mad. You can
If you're kicking their hive, they're going to sting you.
I mean, I can safely, with t-shirt and shorts, stand within 10 feet of the opening of a hive or several hives and not have any concern of getting stung. Because they're not there to get you. They have a job to do. They're in and out. There's also some research regarding farming and in the rural areas with such large cropping going on, the monocropping, that it's not a particularly good environment for bees anymore, because they've got, you know, for miles you've got corn or you've got another crop, and the flowering season for them, it's there and then it's gone. So the food sources are not as abundant as some of these larger farms start to develop, and there's research that's currently being done regarding urban apiaries may be what saves some of that, because people quite often are hired to bring bees out to farms during their flowering season to help farms that may need it and with the fertilizers out there. So I have interest more as a hobbyist, but there is
Serious
potential
bee farmers.
above and beyond, and there's interest. I mean, Cambridge allows it, Minneapolis, St. Paul both allow it. Minneapolis has a huge initiative that they released a year or two ago encouraging the urban bee farms. A lot of businesses are putting them on their roofs or allowing access on their roofs for having farms. It's just utilizing the areas. Even though you're 2-3 stories up, bees can still get up there, and it's definitely out of the way of public. The availability for food sources inside some of the rural areas is a lot more abundant than you would see out where there's, acres and acres or hundreds or even thousands of acres of corn. It's corn. It's not, you don't have your fruit trees and other flowering plants that they can feed on. And the inside city limits, there's a huge variety that flowers all throughout the summer. So, but it's fun. I know there are several people in Isanti that they go to Cambridge to the public apiary there and they keep their bees there. And why
Where in
not
Cambridge
allow
is
them
that?
have them here? What's that?
Where in Cambridge is that?
I don't know. I haven't been there. I
familiar
know
with
that
them.
one of my daughter's friends, she goes to Cambridge. I don't know if maybe it's a farm and he's just got like a big lot that he allows.
Must be outside of city limits then.
It might be. I don't
So
I
it's
don't
probably
know.
not Cambridge, or unless it's Cambridge Township.
Possibly. But I know Cambridge, the city, from what I read, and I don't know if maybe I didn't see it differentiate between a township and Cambridge as the inner city, is allowing it. But more densely populated cities are. I mean, they're beginning to open up to the ideas of it. Minneapolis has a huge initiative. St. Paul has a huge initiative, and I'd like to be able to do that inside city limits as well.
Does Minneapolis have a limit size on the lot?
They do. Their ordinances go up to, I think, an acre or more, up to 5 acres. I don't know how much land size is available where a single household would have more than, even a quarter acre. So I did, when
Do
I
they
had
just like
sent.
have a farm in Minneapolis or like a?
No, like,
what
I
do you
mean,
call
if
it,
you're,
bee
if you're a
apiaries,
house,
or-
1 to 2 or 3 hives, it's not like one
So
hive can produce
They capped
100.
it, so in your home, we could potentially say you can have 3 hives in your home.
Right, and when I sent Jeff kind of a mishmash of a proposed ordinance that I
And I
had
can send it out to
pulled
you guys.
apart, and it does specifically address that per square footage of I think for every 20 or 30,000 square feet of available lot that a person would have, it's like 2 hives, which would allow your average household to have between 2 and 3 hives. I have almost 3/4 of an acre. I'm just on the border of the city, but still inside the city limits. And I think I would be allowed 6 or 7 or something on 3/4 of an acre. But yes, I do think that having a number or a count of how many hives are allowed on each individual lot would be important. Because you run into issues with becoming a nuisance, and how close houses are together.
So let me ask the council this, if I give all the information that he's sent me, I give it to staff and we have staff do a little homework on it, would you be okay with that?
Yeah, I mean,
There's a lot.
we allowed carrier pigeons.
I was just reading, just read an article that some of the, they recommend any beehives being 50 feet away from any property lines of over an acre. 50 feet. Some of our properties are only 80 feet wide. And then you have the liability of your bee coming over and stinging my dog, let's say, that's in my fenced-in backyard. You, as the owner of that bee, because it can fly out of your yard, you are liable for that if,
Any bee could sting your dog.
Well, yeah.
But
how-
that's-
how would
what
you-
I'm
how would
saying
you do
is-
that? Yeah, how would
You didn't have them before,
I-
then all of a sudden
Yeah.
there's bees in your yard.
yeah.
Right.
That's the,
If-
Well,
that's
and
the
I
Jimmy
addressed
common
that
next
as
idea.
door
well.
is allergic to bee stings, your bee goes over and stings him, he has to go to the hospital, you're flipping the bill.
I would be curious to see any case law where you would be able to find evidence of a particular bee or breed of bee that was. Bees can
You're
travel up
willing
to,
to, you would be willing to risk that, though?
well, I mean, bees travel up to 2 to 3 miles. They're quite abundant in,
I just
Nature.
think since they can go
Mhm.
pretty much anywhere they want, I think it's, as a
Right.
homeowner, I think it's a lot of liability. And as a city allowing it, I think it's a lot of liability.
That was my point when he,
yep.
You
And
definitely
I
called me
do
about
address fencing, signage, and a flyaway barrier. Bees will, I mean, they kind of straight path. Within a particular distance of a property line, it is important to have a flyaway barrier, which is, approximately 6 feet high. And also to address bees being a nuisance, because they can be. And so the importance of having a flyaway barrier is basically so they clear that height of your average person, or a little higher than an average person. 6 feet is usually where they're addressed, where they would have to fly over that to be able to get out of your lot. And in my experience with bees, I mean,